was really looking at the sequencing of events, what actually happened, what led to the water outage. More is to come. HNTB continues their work. They will have a much more comprehensive report that comes next month. But again, just to recap, one of the commitments that I made to the public was that we would hire an independent expert from somebody who did not have a relationship pre-existing with the city of Richmond. And so we found HNTB, a national firm with offices all over the country, to come in and to kind of take a new and fresh look at the events that led to where we are. We, in the initial report, as I'm sure all of you have looked at, that affirms that it was the power outage and then a sequence of events, a chain reaction of events that led to flooding, led to equipment damage, and ultimately led to service disruption. The report sort of maps all of that out and then also shares some initial kind of acute recommendations and then longer-term recommendations. And so just to kind of summarize a bit about what we have done. Obviously we have brought on Director Scott Morris as a new leader in Department of Public Utilities, and he has been hard at work over the last few weeks ensuring that we have the treatment plant up and running. We've invested millions of dollars in making sure that we can build a more resilient system, and we've seen that be successful, right? We've had 2 significant weather events since January 6th, including one with significant outages. Thankfully, the water plant is operating as we expect. We've put a lot of backups into place. We've put a lot of investment into getting those filters and pumps back up and running. We have also, in this interim time, changed our staffing models, increased the number and frequency of checks and reviews that we're doing. And so just, again, in this acute period of recovery, making sure that we have all eyes where they need to be to move forward with our operation. Again, this is a preliminary report. We have more information forthcoming, and that will also be shared publicly when it becomes available. And so I'll, with that, happy to take questions.
All right. Start here with Graham. I'm curious about the scope you expect for the final report. It seemed like the preliminary one was just focused mainly on the events of January 6th and not anything that may have come before that. Are you expecting the final report to look at what the city did with the 2022 EPA report, just kind of more longer-term decisions about maintenance at the plant, or is it just going to focus on the events of that day?
Yeah, the question is, do I expect the final report to look at events before the event of January 6th? What has happened in the past that helped get us to this situation? So the way that we initially scoped out the work was really to have the preliminary report focus on January 6th, to focus on the sequence of events, and then to come up with recommendations to invest in the plant, both from an infrastructure standpoint and from a person, process, procedure standpoint. I am sure that there are elements of this that will also look back on past audits, and Scott has already led some of that charge in trying to understand what activities we had underway to address some of the infrastructure issues that have been brought up on previous audits. Is there anything you want to add to that? Yeah. Dr. Scott Morris.
Thanks, everyone. So I don't anticipate it being all inclusive of everything for the EPA report, but just with an understanding that the things that we've put in place right now to move forward with improved maintenance, improved training, coordination through our staff, making sure that the infrastructure that we have is adequate to sustain the operations. Those in and of itself have already been implemented. We've already started to do plan of actions for those, updating our master plans, updating a lot of our reports. I suspect that by the time this report comes to fruition, we'll already have a lot of those already either incorporated or already underway.
Karen?
Yeah, a lot of the reports that came out of Hanover and Henrico were sort of faults of communication, both between the city with the county partners, and even in some portions seemed to fault communication from the city to the public. Has that been part, or will it be part, of the city review? And have you guys changed any internal or external protocols on communication when a crisis is happening?
Yeah, the question is that the Hanover and Henrico reports pointed out communication is one of the issues between the city and the localities and between the city and the public. And will that be a part of what our comprehensive report looks at? I've done sort of an initial scan of the Henrico report, and I looked at our timeline, and obviously, my involvement, as I've shared previously, I got a call at 11 a.m. We had our internal meeting at 1 p.m. But when I looked back both at our report and Henrico's report, early that morning, within, an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of the initial outage, even Henrico's report noted that their operations director was notified around 9 a.m., notified the Department of Public Utilities. So I think there are probably inconsistencies with the different reads on this. But as I look at the timeline that has been laid out in these multiple reports, it all looks fairly within an hour or so of the discrepancy isn't huge. I'll say that. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not overly concerned with the timeline that I'm seeing in these multiple reports. I feel like there was pretty consistent communication from what was being managed at the plant to then letting partners know, and then partners responding to divert their water utility, as of 9 that morning. But I do absolutely know that one of the things that will come out of the comprehensive report is recommendations for how we, what would trigger public communication, what would trigger the need to reach out to our regional partners. And so I'm sure many of that will make its way into our standard operating procedures moving forward.
But you feel good about the city's communication with the counties in the early hours of January 6th?
From what I can tell and from what I was told in the event, I mean, I think it was, there were appropriate communications that went out to the counties. And as it relates to communication with the public, I think there's always this tension of when, I learned this a lot during COVID, right? We can put out information that is incomplete and potentially creates a lot of reaction and stir in a community before you actually need to. And so figuring out when is the right time to provide information and in what form, so that you're not causing unnecessary concern, but you are appropriately readying a community for a response. I think it's part of what is challenging about emergency response.
Mayor, can I ask Mr. Morrison?
Sure, absolutely.
To the technical aspects of the plan. Hi,
Hi.
thank you for being here. So, first of all, I want to ask about the generators there. The power went out at 5:45 a.m. Within 10 minutes, there were 6 feet of water, flooding in the plant. So, do you think, or would you recommend that staff have activated generators immediately upon the loss of power? And then, second of all, with the backup batteries, this report seems to suggest that the IT system actually lost power immediately upon loss of power. So, did that IT system have a backup battery? And if it did it just have no backup power, associated with it? And then with the valves, it says that there was a backup battery attached to those valves, but that the DP staff didn't even know if that backup battery did what it was supposed to do or was capable of doing what it was supposed to do, which was to close the valves, to prevent flooding in the event that a loss of power occurred.
Okay. So 3 questions. One being, did the staff take the appropriate actions for the situation, right? So normal course of action would be you lose your primary power, you go to secondary power, and then you try to restore secondary power first. And that's what they attempted to do. So reflecting on if they took the proper procedures, I wholly believe they took the proper procedures in trying to restore power. Your next question is regarding the UPSs and the SCADA communication, right? So 2-part question. One is the UPSs for the SCADA, and then the second part of the question is the UPSs for the valves. So the SCADA system, that functions on a UPS to make sure that the SCADA system is functioning, but the inputs to that SCADA system are from the other components of the plant. So you might have a PLC that loses power and it loses communication, doesn't feed that communication back to the SCADA system still is operating. So that UPS is sized to keep the SCADA system operating. The next question you had was about the UPSs on the filters. We're still investigating that as part of the preliminary report, but it looks like there was a power blip earlier in the morning that caused the UPS to get depleted to some degree. We need to confirm that with our third-party consultant, and then once we get a confirmation of that, those will be incorporated into the final report.
Tyler?
So according to this report, there was clearly a lack of training and operating procedures. It seems like DPU staff may have even been flying blind in the early hours of responding to the power outage. So I'm wondering who was responsible for not implementing that training and those standard operating procedures, and will that person be held accountable, especially since the EPA back in 2022 already warned the city that it didn't have the proper emergency planning in place and that it wasn't even conducting exercises to respond to a power outage.
Okay, so I'll speak to the first part. The question was basically regarding training, standard operating procedures, why they weren't in place for the operations and what we intend to do in the future. Not speaking backwards, but speaking forward. So I'll turn over to the mayor to talk about the back because I wasn't here during that time. We've already implemented a process where we're revising all the standard operating procedures, all the master plans, all the emergency operation procedures. That process is going to take a little bit of time to basically build up the robustness of that type of structure. But we're looking at to have that fully rolled out by a couple months from now. So all those standard operating procedures will be incorporated into the plan operations. And then we're going to be doing annual training on those, annual exercises on those to make sure that the operators, the maintenance staff are fully informed of those activities. Mayor?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, maybe what I'd add to that is that probably the most concerning part of the report to me was the lack of committed standard operating procedures and standardized emergency response, right? And I think that, while we had an electrical event that led to an equipment failure, there was clearly a component of not having practiced emergency response that led to this event. And so, I think Dr. Morris is absolutely in tune with that and is responsible now for making sure that those standard operating procedures in both, typical time and emergency time are created, and that's the work that he's charged with over the next few months. And I think that, you're asking the question about accountability. Our focus right now is to make sure that the water plant is up and running. If we identify through the course of appropriate procedures, appropriate training, that people still are unable to do the job well, then yeah, absolutely, we will manage that effectively. But we also should recognize that, in the absence of that, we've got to recognize that people have just worked really hard over the last month, right? The people in the water plant have done everything they can to both in the acute event get the plant up and running, and then to continue that effort under Dr. Morris's leadership. And so, I think we come back to that question as we put the right procedures in place, we put the right training in place, and we make sure that we've got the right team and the right culture to move forward together.
And one
Dean,
quick
Dean,
follow-up. Sorry, just one quick follow-up.
No, Tyler, you guys have already had two people from your division in multiple reports. Dean.
Hi, just two really quick questions. Just a follow-up on Tyler's question. This was an issue that two audits found in the warehouse as well, work policies. Can you talk a little bit about that? Have changes been made there at this point in terms of getting those policies, so staff know what's going on there?
Yeah, we just talked about the fact that is, there was a clear recommendation in past audits and in this report is to make sure that we have standard operating procedures written both in typical times and in emergency times. I'll let Dr. Morris just talk more specifically over the last couple of weeks of how he's engaged that with the staff.
Again, my primary focus right now is getting the SOPs for the water treatment plant out, and so we're really focused on that. But this is going to be a standard operating practice across the DPU, and I'm assuming across the city as well. But I can focus on DPU. I can guarantee you that the standard operating procedures for routine operations, they're all going to be incorporated going forward.
Just Jonathan. Jonathan? Sorry. Okay. You. Yes, sir.
I'm Sean from the Times Dispatch. A little bit more forward-looking. Both Henrico and Hanover have endorsed regional cooperation going forward, either through a board or an authority. Henrico even floated the idea of being the source of water for the region going forward. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, the question is, both Hanover and Henrico have endorsed regional cooperation. What do I think about that? Are we willing to engage in a regional conversation? Absolutely. I mean, I think it already is a regional arrangement in many ways, right? The water plant, while it exists in the city, feeds water to both Henrico and Hanover. I think in many ways it's an asset that the region should continue to invest in, right? It has the capacity to produce 132 million gallons, and to try to do that by building new infrastructure elsewhere would be a significant expense. I mean, we're talking north of $1 billion to try to replicate that. Now, we do need to make investments to the current plants to be able to make sure that it can keep that production capacity moving forward, and I think that should absolutely be something that we consider regional investment in, since it is a regional asset. AJ?
Following the audit, you guys have noted that you are planning on making some investments, protocol changes. But before that, we never really got a chance to really get a lot of word from the previous director of utilities, April Bingham. Will there be an opportunity from the public to hear from her about, as far as management of that facility? And have you also spoken with the previous mayor who appointed her and kind of what Stoney and his administration was doing to kind of manage the facility?
Yeah, the question is, would there be an opportunity to talk to the previous director of public utilities, and have I talked to the previous administration about their management of the facility? I have not. I mean, I have certainly exchanged texts with Mayor Stoney just during the crisis, and him sort of sending his well wishes and making himself available. As you know, Director Bingham is no longer with the city, and so I think if you all want to reach out, but we won't be doing anything to be able to pull her back in. I mean, you'll have to pursue that as the media.
So Agent TV is not going to be talking to April Bingham?
Jonathan?
Does the city need the county's assistance in order to get what infrastructure needs to be put in place, or is the city able to prioritize it on its own?
Yeah, the question is, does the city need the county's assistance to be able to get the water plant up and running, or could the city do it on its own? We haven't gotten into the deep finances of what it's going to take, right? Dr. Morris really led an initial look at what damage occurred, what we needed to fix in the short term, and then what in the midterm, what investments we'll need to make. And so we actually made a request to the General Assembly of about $22 million of investment. That request has not moved forward, so we'll continue to look for other sources for that funding. But in the meantime, as we're looking at what we need to do to assure water production for the city and the region, we're absolutely open to having continued conversation with Henrico and Hanover about what they can bring to the table. But to answer the question, it's not a need to enter into a regional arrangement, but it certainly makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm happy to explore it and have been.
Mayor Avula, the timeline suggests that VDH got to the water plant at 12:30. The sites here that they were going to remain at the site until the board of water advisory was lifted. But the timeline also notes that 4:26 is when the city of Richmond officially issued that boil water advisory. Why did it take 4 hours to issue that, and would that be different moving forward?
Question is that VDH was on site at 12:30, but we did not issue a boil water advisory until 4:30. Why did it take so long? I don't fully know at what point, it was an ongoing conversation with VDH to say, when should we do this, right? I mean, again, when I received the initial call at 11, we met at 1. Even at that point, it was not clear that we were going to need to issue a boil water advisory, right? Like, we still, the information we were receiving and that everybody had been sharing was that we had enough in the reservoir that should get us till about 6 p.m. And then as we edged towards that time and saw the reservoir dropping faster than we were expecting, that accelerated the conversation around, okay, we may need to actually issue a boil water advisory. So I don't think VDH being on site, it's not like they were telling us that, hey, you're going to need to do this. I mean, it was an ongoing conversation about how much water is being produced. And because VDH, remember, the Boil Water Advisory is not the only thing that they do, right? They are a regulatory agency for the entire functioning of a water plant. And a boiled water advisory is just a preventive measure that happens after the fact. So I'm not.
Do you think it could have been sooner, knowing all the things that were happening in the morning, going into the early afternoon?
No, I mean, it could have been. I mean, we could have issued it an hour earlier. I don't think it would have made any difference. We could have issued it an hour later, and it wouldn't have made any difference. So I think, you know, getting hung up on the specific time that the water advisory was actually issued is not actually relevant to consumption or human health in any, like, meaningful way.
Jamal, final question.
In a previous statement, you said that staffing is usually around 3 to 4 at the DP water treatment plant, but the report says that it said that it's at 3, but usually falls with 2, occasionally 2, 6, or et cetera. My first question is, how many staff members were present when water crisis happened, and then you think this, how will you be addressing lack thereof of staffing and, I guess, recommendations about what's been going on, because it seems like they're working 12-hour shifts as well.
Yeah, the question is about the staffing model at the operation plant, that the standard staffing model is 3 people. We had 3 people working that night. And so, yeah, I mean, I think one of the recommendations is to look at, does that staffing model need to change at all in the future? And it might be that 3 is fine. I think what the initial preliminary report recommended was just to look at additional redundancy for when somebody calls out, but that wasn't the case on the water treatment night. We had 3 people on site. So it's absolutely one of the things that we'll look at and decide whether we need to change, you know, move from a 12-hour shift to an 8-hour shift, move from 3 to 4. I think that's yet to be seen, depending on, you know, what the operation looks like and what Dr. Morris wants to do. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that. Yeah.
I think the mayor covered it. As part of this preliminary report and the final report, it's going to, you know, probably suggest some staffing changes we could do, and we're going to evaluate those and see what needs to be done. Ultimately, we want to put the plant in a safe operation condition, so that's our ultimate goal.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you.
Sorry, I just have one last question for you. Can you say whether the city, you know, made any changes or edits to this report, or if the engineering consultants had full control over what was released?
I mean, every report that's written is like a conversation, right? Like